My name is Gloria. I am 58 years old, and I have spent 35 years married to Frank, building a life and raising 3 children who always took his side. I helped design and pay for our family home, a colonial-style house with a wraparound porch that I loved more than anything, until the day I came home and found myself locked out of my own house with a text message telling me I was not allowed back in until I apologized. I sold that house that afternoon. Let me know where you are watching from, and be sure to subscribe for more stories about standing up for yourself when everyone else thinks you should back down. I never thought I would be the kind of woman who would sell a house out from under her husband. But then again, I never thought I would be the kind of woman who would spend decades being dismissed by the very family she sacrificed everything for. I was 23 when I met Frank at Syracuse University. I had been an English major with dreams of becoming a novelist. My professors told me I had talent, and I spent countless nights typing away at my dorm desk, creating worlds and characters I hoped would someday touch readers' hearts. I was ambitious, focused, and determined to make my mark on the literary world. Frank was a business major, tall, confident, and charming. He had a way of walking into a room that made everyone turn and look, including me. We met at a campus coffee shop where I was working on a short story. He asked about my writing and seemed genuinely interested. No one had ever taken such an interest before. My parents had always viewed my writing as a hobby, something I would outgrow once real life began. Our romance was a whirlwind. 6 months after that first coffee, we were engaged. My friends thought it was too soon, but I was in love with the way he made me feel seen. The way he would brag to his friends about my talent. The way he promised to support my dreams once we were married. The wedding was small, just family and close friends in my parents' backyard. Frank promised to cherish and respect me. I promised to stand by him through whatever life brought our way. We were young and full of dreams, planning a future where both our ambitions would flourish. Reality set in during our first year of marriage. Frank had taken a job at a financial firm that required long hours. My writing time shrank as I took on more household responsibilities. When I mentioned setting aside dedicated time for my novel, Frank suggested I wait until we were more established. Just a year or two, he said. Then I could pursue writing full-time. Those years never came. Instead, I found myself pregnant with our first child, Thomas. 2 years later came Abigail, and 3 years after that, Lindsay. My manuscript gathered dust in a drawer as diapers, school lunches, and pediatrician appointments filled my days. We purchased land just outside of Albany when Thomas was 4. Frank and I spent months looking at house plans, and I fell in love with a colonial-style design with a wraparound porch where I imagined sitting to write once the children were older. I returned to teaching high school English to help pay for the construction, spending my days molding young minds and my evenings caring for our children while Frank worked late. The house was everything I had dreamed of, but something had shifted in our relationship. Frank began making financial decisions without consulting me, despite my significant contribution to our mortgage. When I questioned a particularly large investment, he reminded me that finance was his expertise, not mine. I found myself apologizing for questioning him, even though half the money was mine. The children witnessed these interactions. They saw their father as the provider and decision-maker, while I was just mom, the one who enforced homework, time, and vegetable consumption. Frank was the fun parent who showed up with presents and took them for ice cream. Is it any wonder they began to take his side in our increasingly frequent disagreements? I told myself this was normal, that marriages had their ups and downs, that the sacrifices I made for my family were worth it because I loved them. I pushed down the growing sense that something was fundamentally wrong with the way I was being treated in my own home. If I had recognized the warning signs earlier, perhaps things would have been different. But I was too busy being a good wife and mother to notice I was slowly disappearing. The day Thomas left for college was bittersweet. As I helped him pack his room, I came across an old photo of me at my typewriter, taken during my college days. I barely recognized the hopeful young woman staring back at me. With our oldest child gone, the house felt different. Abigail was 16 and increasingly independent, spending more time with friends than family. Lindsay at 13 was entering the phase where mothers become embarrassing by default. And Frank was rarely home before 8, his career having taken off, while mine had stalled at teaching high school English. For the first time in almost 2 decades, I had space to think about myself. I dug out my old manuscript, blew off the dust, and began to read. The words transported me back to a time when I believed my voice mattered. When I finished the last page, I cried. Not because the writing was bad, but because it was good, and I had abandoned it. That night, I told Frank I wanted to start writing again. He glanced up from his phone. At your age, isn't that a young person's game? The comment stung, but I pressed on. I was good, Frank. My professors thought I could be published. That was before real life happened, he said, as if my dream was a childish fantasy. Besides, what would you even write about? Your life has been pretty ordinary. I wanted to tell him that ordinary lives could make extraordinary stories in the right hands. Instead, I swallowed my words and changed the subject. But the seed had been planted. I began waking up at 5 in the morning to write before school, creating a new manuscript about a woman finding her voice later in life. Around this time, I also rekindled a friendship with Sandy, a fellow teacher who had divorced her husband 5 years earlier. She invited me to join a local writing group that met weekly at the library. I started attending nervous at first, but gradually growing more confident as the other writers responded positively to my work. Frank noticed my growing independence with suspicion. You seem distant lately, he commented one evening. These writing friends filling your head with ideas. What kind of ideas, I asked. Sandy is divorced, birds of a feather, and all that. I was shocked. Frank, I am not considering divorce. I am considering becoming a writer. The thing I always wanted to be before I put it aside for our family. We have been fine all these years without you playing author, he said dismissively. Why rock the boat now? Each morning I wrote. Each day I taught. Each evening I tried to be the wife and mother my family expected. But something had shifted inside me. I was no longer willing to be invisible. The first major argument came when I mentioned using some of our savings to attend a writing retreat in Vermont. It was expensive, a week-long immersion, with published authors as mentors. Sandy had attended the previous year and returned with a reinvigorated manuscript and industry connections. Absolutely not, Frank said without hesitation. That money is for the kids' college funds and our retirement. I contributed to those savings too, I reminded him. And this is an investment in my future career. Frank laughed. Career, Gloria, be realistic. The chances of getting published are practically zero, especially for someone starting so late. I am not starting. I am continuing something I put on hold to raise our family. The argument escalated. When Abigail and Lindsay came home, Frank immediately involved them. Girls, your mother wants to spend your college money on a writing fantasy camp. What do you think about that? "Dad, that is not fair," I protested. "That is not what I said." But the damage was done. My daughters looked at me with confusion and disappointment. "Mom, I thought you were happy teaching," Lindsay said. "Why do you suddenly want to be a writer?" "It is not sudden," I tried to explain. "It is something I have always wanted." "I have never heard you talk about it," Abigail said firmly in her father's corner. That night, Frank slept in the guest room. The silent treatment had begun a tactic he had employed throughout our marriage whenever I stepped out of the role he had assigned me. The children, seeing their father withdrawn and hurt, naturally blamed me. I heard Abigail consoling him. "Dad, she will get over this phase." A phase, my lifelong dream, reduced to a middle-aged woman's temporary insanity. I did not attend the retreat. I continued teaching and writing in the early morning hours. But something had broken between Frank and me, a fracture that would only widen in the coming months. As my manuscript grew, so did his resentment, and my isolation within my own family deepened a loneliness more profound than I had ever experienced. Sandy recognized the signs. She had lived them herself. "Gloria," she said one day after school, "when was the last time Frank consulted you about finances?" The question caught me off guard. "He handles all that, always has. But you contribute to the household income. You helped pay for your house. Don't you think you should know where your money goes?" I had never considered it. Frank had always managed our money, and I had trusted him implicitly. But Sandy's question planted a seed of doubt that would soon grow into something I could no longer ignore. The discovery happened by accident. Frank had left his laptop open on the kitchen counter while he took a phone call in the backyard. A notification popped up on the screen, an email from a bank I did not recognize. Without thinking, I clicked on it. The email confirmed a transfer of funds to an account number I did not recognize. The amount was substantial, nearly $50,000. My heart began to race as I clicked through to the account dashboard. Frank had never shared our financial passwords with me, claiming it was simpler if one person handled the money. But he had apparently saved his login information on his laptop. What I found left me breathless. A separate account, opened 5 years earlier, containing over $300,000, money that had been systematically diverted from our joint savings. My teaching salary had been going into our family account, helping to pay for groceries and utilities, while Frank had been secretly building his own financial cushion. I stared at the screen, trying to make sense of the betrayal. $300,000 that could have helped pay for the children's education. That could have funded my writing career. That could have been shared with the woman who had stood by him for decades. When Frank returned from his call, he found me still staring at his computer, his face drained of color. "You had no right to look at my private accounts," he said, his voice deadly quiet. "And you had no right to hide family money," I replied, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. "I earned that money. We earned it, together. I have been teaching and raising our children while you built your career. Without me, you would not have any of this." Frank slammed the laptop shut. "You would not understand the investments I am making. This is for our future." "Our future or your future?" I asked. "Because it looks to me like you are preparing for a life without me." The argument that followed was like nothing we had experienced before. Years of suppressed resentment poured out of me. The sacrificed dreams, the dismissals, the subtle undermining of my confidence. Frank responded with cold anger, justifying his secret account as protection against my irrational behavior. "What irrational behavior?" I demanded. This writing nonsense for starters. You have been different ever since you started spending time with that divorced friend of yours. Sandy has nothing to do with this. This is about you lying to me for years. Frank stormed out, taking his laptop with him. I sat at the kitchen table until the kids came home, trying to decide what to do next. When they arrived, I made the mistake of trying to explain what had happened. Dad would never steal, Thomas said immediately. He had come home from college for the weekend, and his father had already shaped him into his defender. He is not stealing, I clarified. He is hiding money that should be part of our family finances. Maybe he has a good reason, Abigail suggested. Dad always thinks about our future. Lindsay, my youngest, looked confused. Are you guys getting divorced? No one is talking about divorce, I said, although the thought had entered my mind for the first time in 35 years of marriage. This is about trust and respect. When Frank returned that evening, he had already spoken to the children by phone. He had told them I was having some kind of breakdown, that I was inventing financial problems because I was unhappy with my life. They believed him without question. Dinner that night was excruciating. The children treated me like I was fragile and irrational. Frank played the patient, concerned husband. I felt like I was in some kind of twisted, psychological experiment, where reality was being rewritten around me. After dinner, I announced that I had made an appointment with a financial advisor to understand our true financial situation. The table went silent. That would be a breach of my privacy, Frank said calmly. Privacy ended when you hid family money, I replied. Thomas stood up. Mom, you need to let this go. Dad has always taken care of us. Abigail nodded in agreement. Yeah, this is getting weird. Only Lindsay looked uncertain, her eyes moving between her father and me, as if trying to decipher a complex equation. That night, I slept in the guest room. The next morning, I made an appointment with not just a financial advisor, but an attorney. Something had broken inside me, a lifetime of accommodation, replaced by a desperate need for truth. What I did not know was that my small act of rebellion would trigger a response I could never have anticipated, one that would change everything. The meeting with the attorney was a revelation. Sharon Miller was a divorce specialist who had seen cases like mine countless times. As I explained my situation, she nodded with understanding rather than surprise. Financial infidelity is often a precursor to actual infidelity, she explained. Or it can simply be a power play. Either way, you need to protect yourself. She advised me to gather documentation of all our assets before confronting Frank further. The house deed, mortgage, statements, investment accounts, everything that constituted our marital property. She also suggested I open my own bank account immediately and begin depositing my paychecks there. But would not that make me just like him? I asked. No, Sharon said firmly. He has been hiding assets for years. You are simply securing your financial independence going forward. There is a significant difference. I left her office with a to-do list and a strange sense of calm. For the first time in decades, I was taking concrete steps to protect myself rather than accommodate everyone else. The feeling was both terrifying and exhilarating. The next day, I went to the county records office and requested copies of our property documents. What I discovered sent a chill through me. The house that I had helped design and pay for the home where I had raised my children was primarily in my name. Frank had put the mortgage in my name because his credit had been damaged by some early business ventures. We had both contributed to the payments, but legally, I had more claim to the property than he did. This information sat heavily with me as I drove home. I had no intention of using it against Frank. I simply wanted an honest conversation about our finances and our future. I wanted the partnership we had promised each other 35 years ago. I decided to make one last attempt at reconciliation. I prepared Frank's favorite meal, bourbon-glazed salmon, with roasted potatoes, and set the table with our best dishes. I even bought a bottle of the expensive Cabernet he preferred for special occasions. When he came home, his eyes narrowed with suspicion at the elaborate setup. "What is this about?" he asked, setting down his briefcase. "I thought we could talk," I said. "Really talk, without accusations or defensiveness, about our future." He sat down cautiously. "Is this about the money again?" "It is about everything, Frank. The money is just a symptom. We have drifted so far from where we started. You make decisions without me. You dismiss my dreams. The children follow your lead. I feel invisible in my own life." Frank took a sip of wine, considering his response. "You have everything a woman could want. A beautiful home, children who have turned out well, financial security. Most women would be grateful." His words landed like a slap. "Grateful for being treated like a child in my own marriage, for having my lifelong ambitions dismissed as a phase, for discovering my husband has been hiding money from me for years. I knew you would not let that go," Frank said, pushing back from the table. "This is why I can never be honest with you. You turn everything into a drama." "This is not drama. This is our life." The children arrived, then, having been invited by Frank without my knowledge, they entered the dining room to find their father and me in a standoff across the salmon. "What is going on?" Thomas asked immediately, moving to stand beside his father. "Your mother is unhappy again," Frank said, with practiced weariness. "Nothing is ever enough." "Mom," Abigail sighed, "why can you not just appreciate what you have?" I looked at my children, these people I had nurtured and loved, now standing united against me. "Do you really not see what is happening here? Your father has been hiding money, making unilateral decisions, and dismissing me for years, and you all follow his lead without question." Lindsay, my youngest, looked uncertain. "Dad, is that true? About hiding money?" Before Frank could answer, Thomas interjected. "Dad is protecting the family finances. Mom has been acting erratically." "Erratically," I repeated, stunned. "By wanting to write, by asking questions about our finances." The dinner devolved from there. Frank portrayed himself as the patient husband, dealing with an increasingly unreasonable wife. The children, except for Lindsay, who remained uncomfortably silent, rallied to defend him. I was cast as the villain, the ungrateful woman who could not appreciate her blessed life. By the time they all left, I was shaking with a combination of fury and heartbreak. I had raised these children to be compassionate and fair, yet they could not see the injustice happening right in front of them. The gaslighting was so complete that even I had moments of questioning my own perception. I spent that night in the guest room again, crying until there were no tears left. In the morning, I made 2 decisions. First, I would meet with a financial advisor to fully understand our assets and options. Second, I would not tolerate being treated this way for another day. What I did not realize was that Frank had made decisions of his own ones that would force my hand in ways I never imagined. I left early the next morning before anyone else was awake. I had an appointment with the financial advisor Sharon had recommended, followed by a meeting back at her office to discuss my options. The meetings were illuminating and disturbing in equal measure. The financial advisor, Marcus Jenkins, reviewed the documentation I had gathered and confirmed what I had begun to suspect. Not only had Frank been hiding money, but he had been systematically moving assets out of our joint names for years. This is unfortunately common, Marcus explained. One spouse begins diverting funds, usually in preparation for a divorce or major life change. But we have been married for 35 years, I said, still struggling to accept the betrayal. Why would he start this 5 years ago? That is when your youngest child entered high school. Correct. Often, the spouse planning an exit waits until child-rearing responsibilities are nearly complete. The implications were devastating. Had Frank been planning to leave me for 5 years? Had our entire marriage been a lie? My meeting with Sharon afterward was equally sobering. She outlined my legal options, which ranged from divorce proceedings to a legal separation while we attempted to reconcile. She emphasized that Frank's financial maneuvers could be considered fraudulent in court. The fact that the house is primarily in your name gives you significant leverage, she noted. In most cases, like this, the court would likely award you the house, or at least a significant portion of its value. I left her office feeling simultaneously empowered and hollowed out. I had clarity about my legal position, but was mourning the loss of the marriage I thought I had. As I drove home, I rehearsed what I would say to Frank. I would propose counseling transparency, a fresh start. If he refused, I would have to consider more drastic measures. What I never imagined was that I would not get the chance to say any of it. When I turned onto our street, I immediately noticed something was wrong. There were boxes on our front porch. As I got closer, I recognized them as my belongings: clothes books, personal items. Next to them sat my suitcases, hastily packed. I parked in the driveway and approached the porch in disbelief. When I tried my key in the front door, it did not work. The locks had been changed. My phone buzzed with a text message from Frank. "You are not allowed in the house until you apologize for accusing me and going behind my back to attorneys. Your behavior is unacceptable." I stood on my own porch, locked out of the home I had helped build and pay for, surrounded by my hastily packed belongings. Neighbors walked their dogs past the house, averting their eyes from my humiliation. I called Frank, but he did not answer. I tried Thomas, then Abigail, then Lindsay. All three sent me to voicemail. The betrayal was absolute, not just from Frank, but from my children. They had allowed this to happen, perhaps even helped pack my things. The family I had devoted my life to had discarded me for daring to stand up for myself. I sat on the porch steps, surrounded by the boxes of my life, and felt something shift inside me. The hurt and shock gave way to a cold, clarifying anger. I remembered what Sharon had told me about the house being primarily in my name, about how Frank had been preparing to discard me for years. With shaking fingers, I called Sharon's office. "My husband has changed the locks and put my belongings outside." I explained, my voice steadier than I expected. "He says I cannot come back until I apologize." "That is illegal," Sharon said immediately. "It is your house, too. You can call the police to gain entry." "I have a different question," I said. "Since the house is primarily in my name, can I sell it without his permission?" There was a pause on the other end of the line. "In your state, with the way the deed is structured, yes. It would be unusual, but legal. Are you considering that option?" "I am not just considering it," I replied. "I want to do it today." Sharon connected me with a real estate agent who specialized in quick sales, Diane Rodriguez. When I explained my situation, she was skeptical, but intrigued. "You understand, You would get significantly less than market value for such a quick sale, she warned. I understand, and you are certain this is what you want to do. It is an irreversible decision. I looked at my belongings piled on the porch, thought of Frank's text message, and felt an unexpected sense of liberation. I have never been more certain of anything, I said. Diane sprung into action with remarkable efficiency. She had an investor client who bought properties for cash with minimal inspection. She arranged for him to see the house that afternoon, using her realtor access. As the primary name on the deed, I had the legal right to authorize the showing. I waited in my car down the street, watching as Diane and her client entered my home of 20 years. The home where I had raised my children, where I had sacrificed my dreams, where I had been slowly erased. An hour later, they emerged, and Diane walked to my car. "He is offering $750,000, she said. "It is at least $200,000 below market value, but he can close immediately." "How immediately?" I asked. "We can sign the papers this afternoon. The money would be in your account within 24 hours. I thought about Frank's text, about the boxes on the porch, about 35 years of diminishment. "Let us do it," I said. 3 hours later, I sat in Diane's office, signing the paperwork that would sell the colonial house with the wraparound porch I had once loved so dearly. With each signature, I felt a mixture of grief and power. I was selling my home, but I was also reclaiming my autonomy. When the final document was signed, I took a deep breath and composed a text message to Frank. "You said I could not come in until I apologize. I chose to sell it instead. Check your email for the closing details." I pressed send, then turned off my phone. Whatever chaos was about to ensue, I needed time to process what I had done. Sandy had offered me her guest room, and that is where I headed, leaving behind the pile of belongings on the porch of a house that no longer belonged to either of us. The fallout was as immediate as it was explosive. When I turned my phone back on the next morning, there were 37 missed calls and over 50 text messages. Frank's ranged from threatening to pleading. "You cannot do this. This is illegal. Please call me back. We can work this out." My children were equally distraught. Thomas called me selfish and vindictive. Abigail demanded to know where she was supposed to live when she came home from college. Lindsay, my youngest, was the only one who seemed conflicted rather than accusatory. "Mom, I do not understand why you would do this." Frank had apparently called his attorney immediately, only to discover what I already knew: the sale was legal. With the house primarily in my name and the paperwork already signed, there was nothing he could do to reverse it. The money had been transferred to my newly opened account, and the investor had given Frank 30 days to vacate the property. The extended family quickly chose sides. Frank's parents and siblings called me cruel and irrational. My own brother, who had always liked Frank more than he liked me, suggested I seek psychiatric help. Only my sister Jennifer offered unqualified support, saying, "Good for you, Gloria. It is about time someone stood up to him." Sandy was my rock during those chaotic days. She let me stay in her guest room without question and defended me against the barrage of criticism. "They locked you out of your own house," she reminded me whenever my resolve wavered. "What did they expect you to do?" Frank attempted several strategies to undo the sale. He claimed I had acted under duress. He suggested I was mentally unstable. He even tried to argue that his name should have been primary on the deed. His attorney eventually advised him that none of these approaches would succeed. When legal remedies failed, Frank tried reconciliation. He sent flowers to Sandy's house with a card that read, "I'm sorry. Let's talk." When I did not respond, he showed up in person, looking haggard and desperate. "Gloria, please," he begged from Sandy's front porch as she stood protectively beside me. I overreacted. "We can fix this." "There is nothing to fix," I replied, surprising myself with my composure. "The house has been sold. The money is in my account. Half of it is yours, which is more generous than you have been with me." "I don't care about the money," he insisted. "I care about our family, our home. You cared so much that you locked me out and demanded I apologize for asking questions about our finances." He had no answer for that. The most painful part was the estrangement from my children. They blamed me entirely for the disruption of their lives. Thomas called me toxic. Abigail blocked my number. Only Lindsay maintained contact, though her messages were confused and hurt. With Sandy's help, I found a small apartment not far from the school where we both taught. I furnished it simply with new belongings, unwilling to fight Frank for the furniture and household items we had shared. The apartment was nothing like the colonial house, with its spacious rooms and wraparound porch, but it was mine. No one could lock me out. No one could diminish me within its walls. The divorce proceedings began with an ugliness that surprised even Sharon. Frank fought for every penny, contradicting his earlier claim that he did not care about the money. He demanded the entire proceeds from the house sale, arguing that his career had funded the mortgage payments. When presented with evidence of my financial contributions, he claimed they were minimal compared to his. The court disagreed. The judge, a no-nonsense woman in her 60s, saw through Frank's manipulations. She awarded me half of all marital assets, including his secret account. The final settlement gave me financial security I had never imagined possible. But money could not heal the rift with my children. They viewed the divorce as entirely my fault, a result of my midlife crisis and unreasonable behavior. When I tried to explain Frank's financial deceptions, they dismissed my concerns as paranoia. Years of watching their father undermine me had normalized his behavior in their eyes. During this painful period, I turned to writing as both escape and therapy. The early morning hours in my small apartment became sacred time when I worked on my novel about a woman finding her voice after decades of silence. The parallels to my own life were obvious, but the fiction allowed me to explore my feelings in ways direct confrontation could not. As the divorce finalized and the dust began to settle, I found myself at a crossroads. I had stood up for myself in the most dramatic way possible. I had secured my financial future, but I had lost my family in the process. Was it worth it? Had I acted rashly in selling the house? These questions haunted my quieter moments. What I did not yet realize was that this ending was also a beginning, and that the most important journey still lay ahead. The first 6 months after selling the house were the hardest of my life. Despite the righteous anger that had fueled my decision, there were nights when doubt crept in, like a thief, stealing my certainty and leaving guilt in its place. Had I overreacted? Was there another way I could have handled the situation? These questions circled like vultures during sleepless nights. The holidays were particularly painful. Thanksgiving came and went without a word from my children. I sent each of them a card expressing my love and hope for reconciliation, but received no response. Christmas morning, I sat alone in my apartment, opening gifts from Sandy and Jennifer, fighting back tears as I remembered decades of family celebrations. Frank had moved into a luxury apartment downtown, and according to mutual acquaintances, had begun dating a woman from his office. The knowledge stung, confirming my suspicions that he had been preparing for a post-marriage life long before I discovered his secret account. Teaching became my anchor. In the classroom, I was still Ms. Reynolds, respected and valued. My students responded to my increased enthusiasm as I incorporated creative writing exercises into their curriculum. Several commented that I seemed different, more energetic. "You are not as sad as you used to be," one observant senior told me. Was I sad before? Had my resignation to an unfulfilling marriage been so obvious that even teenagers could perceive it? The most significant change came through my writing. With half of the house proceeds invested for my future and the other half transferred to Frank, as agreed, I had the financial freedom to reduce my teaching load to part-time. This gave me mornings to write without exhaustion. The manuscript I had been picking at for years began to take coherent shape. My writing group became my surrogate family. Every Thursday evening, we gathered in the library conference room to share our work and offer constructive criticism. These were people who valued my voice, who saw my story as worthy of telling. Their encouragement sustained me through the darkest periods of estrangement from my biological family. Therapy also helped. Dr. Karen Williams specialized in women transitioning through major life changes. During our weekly sessions, she helped me recognize patterns of emotional abuse I had normalized over decades. What Frank did is called gaslighting, she explained during one particularly illuminating session. He made you question your own perceptions and memories. He enlisted your children to reinforce his narrative. This is a common tactic in controlling relationships. But I let it happen, I said. For 35 years, I let it happen. You were doing what women of your generation were taught to do, Dr. Williams replied. Accommodate, sacrifice, prioritize family harmony above all else. The question is, what will you do now that you see the pattern? What I did was right. Every morning, I sat at my small kitchen table and poured my experiences into fiction. The protagonist of my novel, Eleanor, shared my journey from accommodation to awakening, though the details differed. Through her, I processed my own evolution. 6 months into this new life, I took a significant step. With my manuscript complete at 87,000 words, I began submitting to literary agents. The rejections came swiftly, as I had expected, but so did requests for the full manuscript. 3 agents expressed interest, and ultimately, I signed with Marianne Taylor of Cornerstone Literary. This story will resonate with so many women, Marianne told me during our first call. Women who have subordinated their dreams for decades, only to discover it is never too late to reclaim them. Marianne sold the novel to a respected independent publisher 4 months later. The advance was modest, but meaningful, a tangible validation of the talent my professors had recognized 35 years earlier. The publication date was set for the following spring, giving me time for revisions in preparation for the momentous event. It was during this period of professional fulfillment and personal healing that Lindsay, my youngest, reached out. A text message appeared on a random Tuesday. "Mom, can we talk?" We met at a coffee shop halfway between her college campus and my apartment. At 20, she was no longer the teenager who had witnessed her parents' marriage disintegration. She had grown into a thoughtful young woman, her eyes more serious than I remembered. "I read your manuscript," she said after we had settled with our drinks. I nearly choked on my latte. "How? Dad left the house in such a hurry, he forgot a box of your things in the garage. Your printed draft was in it. I took it with me back to school." My heart raced. The manuscript was deeply personal, thinly veiled fiction that exposed the dynamics of my marriage. Lindsay, I never meant for you to read that. I am glad I did, she said quietly. It helped me understand. Dad always controlled the narrative. He told us you were having some kind of breakdown, that you were irrational and vengeful. But your book showed me your side of the story. Tears welled in my eyes. It is just fiction, I said weakly. Lindsay reached across the table and took my hand. Mom, I know what gaslighting is. My psychology professor covered it last semester. After reading your book, I recognized it in how Dad treated you, in how we all treated you. That conversation marked the beginning of a tentative reconciliation with Lindsay. She began visiting my apartment occasionally, sometimes bringing her laundry or staying for dinner. We carefully avoided discussing Frank or her siblings, focusing instead on rebuilding our relationship from the ground up. Thomas and Abigail remained distant. Thomas, most like his father in temperament, refused all contact. Abigail occasionally responded to my texts with brief, non-committal replies. Their absence was a constant ache. But Dr. Williams helped me accept that I could not control their choices. I could only keep the door open and hope they would eventually walk through. As the months passed and the publication date for my novel approached, I felt myself gradually healing. The apartment had become a true home, decorated with items that reflected my taste rather than compromises. My part-time teaching schedule allowed me to mentor students interested in creative writing. I had begun preliminary work on a second novel. Then came the day I received my author copies of The Invisible Wife. Holding the physical book with my name on the cover was a moment of such profound vindication that I wept. The young woman who had dreamed of becoming a novelist at Syracuse University had finally achieved her goal at age 60. The book's dedication read, "For anyone who has ever felt invisible, your story matters." The path to this moment had been unexpected and painful. I had lost my house, my marriage, and to some extent, my children. But I had found myself, and that I was learning was a fair trade. My novel, The Invisible Wife, was not a bestseller by any commercial standard, but it found its audience. Women of a certain age wrote to tell me how Eleanor's journey mirrored their own. Book clubs invited me to join their discussions via video call. A local reading series featured me alongside established authors. The validation was healing in ways I had not anticipated. After decades of having my voice diminished and my dreams dismissed, strangers were finding value in my words. Each message from a reader who felt seen by my story helped repair another fracture in my self-worth. My publisher organized a small book tour through the Northeast. At a signing in Boston, an elderly woman waited patiently in line to have her book signed. When she reached the toll, she leaned down and whispered, "I left my husband of 52 years after reading your novel. Thank you for giving me courage." I was stunned by the impact of my words. The responsibility felt enormous, but also affirming. I had transformed my pain into something that helped others navigate their own. Lindsay attended my hometown signing, sitting in the front row and beaming with pride as I read an excerpt. Afterward, she introduced me to her friends as my mom, the author, a simple phrase that meant the world to me. Our relationship continued to strengthen, though she maintained contact with Frank and often found herself in the uncomfortable position of go-between. "Dad read your book," she told me during one of our coffee dates. My heart skipped. What did he say? He called it fictional revenge fantasy, but I could tell it affected him. He got really quiet after finishing it. I wasn't surprised by Frank's dismissal. Acknowledging the truth of my portrayal would require a level of self-reflection he had never demonstrated. Still, I hoped the book might cause him to reconsider his behavior, if not toward me, then perhaps in his new relationship. The biggest surprise came 6 months after publication, when Thomas emailed me. The message was brief. "Mom, Lindsay gave me your book. Can we talk?" Our reunion was awkward, but necessary. Thomas had his father's stubbornness, but also an analytical mind that could not ignore evidence. Unlike Frank, he was capable of reassessing his conclusions when presented with new information. "I didn't want to believe Dad could be manipulative," he admitted as we sat in a park near his apartment. "It was easier to think you were having some kind of midlife crisis." "I understand," I said, and I did. "You grew up seeing a version of our marriage that Frank and I both presented. The dutiful wife, the provider husband. We all participated in that fiction." "But the money," Thomas pressed. "He really hid all that from you." "Yes, and more that I discovered during the divorce proceedings." Thomas shook his head, processing. "I am sorry I didn't listen, that I didn't even try to see your perspective." His apology meant everything. We had a long way to go in rebuilding trust, but that conversation opened a door I had feared was permanently closed. Abigail remained the holdout, steadfast in her loyalty to Frank. According to Lindsay, she refused to read my novel or discuss the divorce beyond condemning my actions. Of my 3 children, she had always been the most black and white, in her thinking, the most resistant to nuance. I continued sending birthday cards and occasional texts, letting her know my door remained open whenever she was ready. The 2nd anniversary of selling the house arrived without fanfare. I spent the day writing at my kitchen table, now working on my 3rd novel. The second, about female friendship as a saving grace in midlife, had been published 6 months earlier, to stronger reviews and sales than the first. I had found my voice as a writer, clear and confident. My apartment, once a stopgap measure after leaving my marriage, had become a true sanctuary. The walls were adorned with art. I had chosen the bookshelves filled with volumes Frank would have considered frivolous. Most importantly, it contained no ghosts of former expectations or failures. Every corner reflected the woman she had become, rather than the woman I had been trained to be. Financially, I had made peace with my decisions. Yes, I had sold the house for less than market value in a moment of emotional crisis. But that decision had catalyzed a complete transformation of my life. The money from the sale, wisely invested with Marcus Jenkins' help, combined with my teaching income and modest royalties, provided a comfortable living. I would never be wealthy, but I had something more valuable: autonomy. Dr. Williams and I had reduced our sessions to monthly check-ins, focusing now on continued growth rather than healing from trauma. During one such session, she asked me a question that stopped me cold. "Gloria, if you could go back and change your decision to sell the house, would you?" I considered carefully before answering. No, it was an extreme reaction to an extreme situation. But it was the clearest statement I could make that I would no longer accept being erased. Everything good in my life now stems from that moment of absolute refusal. "What would you say to other women in similar situations?" she asked. "I wouldn't necessarily recommend selling the house out from under your husband," I said with a small smile. "But I would say this: it is never too late to reclaim your voice. The people who truly love you will eventually hear it. Those who don't, well, perhaps they loved only the version of you that served their needs." As I left Dr. Williams' office that day, My phone buzzed with a text from Lindsay. Abigail called me. She wants your number. I think she is ready to talk. A wave of emotion washed over me. Hope mingled with apprehension. Reconciliation with Abigail would complete the circle of healing with my children. It would not erase the past or magically create the family dynamic I had once envisioned, but it would be another step toward a future where authenticity replaced accommodation. That evening, I sat on my small balcony, watching the sunset, reflecting on the journey from locked-out wife to published author. The path had been neither straight nor easy. There had been moments of crushing doubt and profound loneliness. But there had also been discovery, friendship, and a reclamation of self I had never thought possible. The house with the wraparound porch had never truly been mine. And I realized it had been a beautiful cage, one I had helped build. My true home was this life I had created from the ashes of that decisive afternoon. This voice I had finally allowed myself to use. My phone rang. Abigail's name appeared on the screen. I took a deep breath and answered, stepping into the next chapter of my story. What would you do if you found yourself locked out of your own home? Would you have made the same decision I did? Share your thoughts in the comments. And if this story resonated with you, please like and subscribe for more stories about finding strength in difficult situations. Remember, it is never too late to reclaim your voice and your life. Thank you for listening to my journey.